Welcome to Truckee Talks. I'm your host, Maya Schneider. And this week, we're bringing you our Town Engineer and Public Works Director, Dan Wilkins. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Maya.
Or I should say, welcome back. You've been on Truckee Talks a number of times, giving us town updates.
A couple times.
It's going to be a little different today, because we're going to grill you a little bit about your personal life. That's where we're going to start.
That's what I heard.
Well, I promise I don't have any pictures of you like I did of Jim Porter. So, of course, I do have some of your report cards, and we're going to talk about that.
I know.
Dan, let's talk about this. First of all, where did you come from? You're not from around here.
No, I grew up in the great state of Vermont, in the northern part near the Canadian border on a family-owned dairy farm at the time, and moved to San Francisco for a number of years after that, and then had the good fortune to come up here to Tahoe, Truckee area after I got done with those two stints.
So you were weaned on Ben and Jerry's?
Yeah,
brought up in Vermont?
The milk my folks still produce goes to Ben and Jerry's. So anytime I eat a slice of it, I know it's got a little piece of home in it.
Well, gosh, I think I've invested quite well in your family's future.
Probably some of my retirement too. So.
How did you know when you wanted to be an engineer? Was that something you always knew?
No, I got into it on the advice of my high school guidance counselor. I went to him when I was a sophomore in high school. Said, I like working outside. I'm good in math. What's a good career for me? I don't want to spend the rest of my life on the dairy farm. Mm-hmm. He suggested civil engineering. 2 years later, I found myself in a civil engineering program, and that's how I got into it.
Well, you seem to have taken to it like a fish to water. I mean, you really...
It's a lot of fun. It's an opportunity to do professional engineering work, be involved with a lot of interesting projects, and also it gets you outside a little bit. Not as much recently as I would have hoped, but it's a combination of being outdoors and being able to use some of the skills I'm best at is what got me into it.
Well, when you became the town engineer, you were pretty young. I think the town felt to some degree like they were taking a gamble on a youngster.
I think they were, and I appreciate the fact that they did. Yeah, I was 30 years old when I got the nod as the town engineer. It was a real interesting sequence of events. Mm-hmm. I decided to leave the Bay Area and come to the Tahoe area. I initially did not have a job, didn't have any specific intention on staying in the area for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. About 3 weeks after I got here, I was fortunate enough to get a position with a local consulting engineer who did a lot of business with the town. So I spent 3 to 4 years doing that. And then the town had a position at an associate level, associate engineer, that opened up. That was working for John Lander,
right,
who was the town engineer at the time. I applied for that position, was fortunate enough to be selected for it, and then John left 8 months later. So I was a little discouraged at first because I had always hoped that I'd have an opportunity for John's job. When he left, I was thinking that only 8 months after I'd been with the town, I probably had not yet had enough opportunity to prove myself. And that they would be looking for someone with a lot more experience, at least with the town or with that town engineer type position. Threw my hat in the ring with about 20 other applicants and was fortunate enough to be selected as the #1 applicant.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, a good friend of mine and my predecessor in the Public Works Department, Tom Covey, decided to leave the town and go to Southern California for another job that he had down there. And so engineering and public works, as you know, was recombined at that point. And then I've got about 35 people working under me now.
That's a big hat. You're wearing a hat for engineering and you're wearing a hat for public works. And
Yeah.
that's a number of employees and a number of different tasks, a lot of different jobs in there.
Yeah, and really going from engineering, it was a lot more project oriented, which was a lot of fun. When I went to public works, there were a lot more employees that came
Yes.
along with that,
Yeah.
and I'm having to become more management oriented and less project oriented. So I'm still going through that transition.
What are some of the challenges for you working as a department head for town government?
Probably the biggest challenge is not having enough time to do everything we want to do.
Yeah.
There's so many projects, and the town is so active right now that there's a laundry list of projects that we could be tearing into, and I'd love to be a lot more personally involved with a lot of them, and it's just the time constraint is really the biggest, I wouldn't call it a frustration, but the biggest limitation, I guess, on what I've got going on.
Now, you work with the town council and the town manager every year on prioritizing what's important, and
Yeah.
you find that shift frustrating, or does it work for you?
No, I think that's great that the town does that. It's interesting how priorities change depending on what's the hottest topic of the day.
Right.
As you know, the courtyard came up recently, and that's coming up as a higher priority, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Yeah.
Maybe get to move it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very good process that the town goes through to take a look at what it's doing on an annual basis and what its priorities are and how they shift or haven't shifted. And then it also provides an opportunity for us as staff to talk with the council about how important the priorities are, what we should be working on, making sure we're doing what the council wants us to be doing in our day-to-day activities.
What's the upside? What are the things about your job that you enjoy the most?
I could go on for a long time.
We know that.
I do it all the time. I think what I enjoy the most is the opportunity to be part of a growing community like Truckee. From an engineering and public works perspective, there's so much construction activity going on, either that the town is sponsoring, that the private development community is sponsoring, that our partners in the local utility districts are sponsoring, and the ability to be a part of that and hopefully to facilitate that is, I think, what I like most about the job.
Yeah, you really are on the leading edge of everything that's going on.
Yeah, and the council is very progressive. I mean, projects like the roundabout. This town was one of the first towns to, or cities, municipalities, agencies in the country to look at that type of a roadway solution. And the opportunity to work with such a progressive, forward-thinking council is a great asset to the community and to us as staff, I believe.
We're not hearing any snickers out there in the audience as you say that.
I need your vote now.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, you've got 11 more meetings to get that, Dan. Let's flop to the personal just for 1 minute longer. You still qualify as a newlywed?
I do. I was married last summer, August 4th. Got a lovely wife, Suzanne Wilkins, used to be Suzanne Larson. She works for a consulting engineer in the Tahoe Basin, and she works in the environmental permitting sector. So she helps folks get permits from agencies and departments like myself sometimes.
Two engineers in the house. Something tells me that your firstborn child will be the creative sort and won't understand a thing that you're saying.
Yeah, right. We've got his pencil protector lined up, so his pocket protector.
Palm Pilot and pocket protector, and he'll be all set.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, let's flip over to some of the projects the town is doing. I know you're really busy. There's a lot on your plate, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
We can't talk about all of them, but let's talk about a few of them. Hartley, I know you've got a couple of stills to show us, so let's bring those up on the screen one at a time. Dan, walk us through this.
Okay. This is an aerial photograph of the downtown area of Truckee. On the northern side, and kind of just to the left of the screen as you face it, is two gray lines you see. That is the Interstate 80 corridor.
Right, okay.
And then way to the left of the screen and just below it, you see the little circle there. That's the roundabout.
The roundabout, okay.
So obviously, as you head to the right on your screen, you're getting into the Brickletown area and the downtown area, and then down to the south, you can see the Truckee River there. One of the projects that the town's working on, and it's been ongoing almost since incorporation, is trying to figure out how we can take the downtown area and improve it without wrecking it.
Without destroying it.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is we've got a lot of historic buildings in the area, we've got a lot of interesting structures, a lot of interesting features. We've got that combined with a desire to expand our sidewalks and improve our drainage, improve the streets down there, and those two things come into conflict from time to time.
Well, I was going to say there's sort of a tension, a political tension, and then maybe a very real tension between the needs that you see for road improvements and safety widths and turnarounds and that sort of thing, and the need that many people in our community see for narrower streets and more constricted traffic movement.
Right, and we're going through a process to try to strike that balance, and it varies from block to block based on where the buildings are, what the traffic levels are, what the type of parking is. So we're in the process of a community input process and engineering effort that attempts to resolve those two issues to come to a balance of those competing factors that ultimately we can present to the town council and say, we think this is the best balance of these competing interests, and let's set these lines and draw these lines on paper so that we can plan around them for the future, so that as development occurs, new projects occur,
rehabilitation,
rehabs, whatever, they can be built to those to that line that we've worked out through that public process.
Okay. Our next still store is up, Dan, and tell us a little bit about what this is.
This shows the long black line at the bottom of the screen you see, that's the graphical depiction of the Interstate 80 corridor.
Okay.
The shaded area you see are some existing dirt roads that long range could become a public roadway. It was previously referred to as the Third Tahoe Donner Connector Project. It's now referred to as the Pioneer Trail and Bridge Street Extension Project. And the town has done preliminary engineering and is getting ready to move forward on an environmental impact report for that project to look at the pros and cons of constructing that significant of a facility. The other thing I'd note is you see there's kind of an east-west shaded line. And then there's two stubs, one that goes to the south towards downtown, one that goes to the north.
Right.
The one that goes to the north is being referred to as Thayer Drive. There's actually two significant projects right at the north end of that are likely going to be happening this summer. On the left side of the line, as you look at the screen, there's a new subdivision going in known as Pine Forest at Truckee.
Right.
We're expecting some of the logging's occurred on that. We're expecting the roadway construction to begin and the infrastructure to begin on that. To the right of that line is where the school district is contemplating their new middle school. And we're expecting that they're going to be rolling on that project as the summer goes along. So two fairly significant projects that we'll see activity in that area over the course of the summer.
And what's the status, briefly, hang on that still there, Hartley, I got a question.
Yeah.
What's the status on the Pioneer Trail Road and the Third Tahoe Donner access? Is that a 10-year project, a 5-year project? Is it going to happen, not going to happen?
My expectation is that it will need to happen at some point to facilitate the town's desire to continue with reasonable growth without unreasonable traffic impacts. That needs to be balanced with the desire to keep Donner Pass Road as a 2-lane facility, and which is one of our general plan policies, as you know.
Right.
And I think in order to do that, ultimately that road is going to become a necessity. I mean, as traffic levels increase, we see it on a daily basis, it becomes more and more critical. In terms of timing, my guess is it's probably a 10-year window. If all the funding were available, it could be a 5-year window, but some of the funding is being put in place as we speak. There's other elements of the project which are unfunded at this point, and that's probably going to be the driving force on when that road gets constructed, if there's ultimately a determination that that is the best thing for the community.
Right, right. So we're still in the investigating arena for that. Yeah. Okay, Hartley. All right, there we go. There's the third still store. Dan, again, a map of Truckee, this time the west side.
Yeah, this is mostly the Tahoe Donner subdivision. You see Donner Lake at the lower end. This shows some of the paving projects that the town has going on this summer. The red line you see on Northwoods Boulevard The red line you see is Northwoods Boulevard, or a portion of it. That's going to be a reconstruction job that's going to be happening this summer. That project by itself is going to be $1 million to $1,200,000. It's a project that's being funded out of the Measure A fund that the town voters approved 3 years ago. And so there will be significant construction activity for what I'm expecting to be a 1-month period on Northwoods Boulevard. What you see to the north of that are some blue lines up in the Wolfgang area of Tahoe-Donner. Those are the last of the streets in Tahoe-Donner that are in severe states of deterioration, to put it mildly.
To put it mildly, right.
That are going to be overlaid this summer.
Okay.
And what the town's been doing in Tahoe-Donner is really tracking behind the gas company.
Right.
So as the gas lines are installed, we're trying to pave behind them so that we're not paving a street that gets dug up the next year. The other thing I'd note is the ski slope loop is scheduled to be overlain this summer in the Tahoe-Donner portion of town as well. What you don't see on the still, but our other projects that will affect our residents this summer, Sierra Meadows, we've got about 50% of that subdivision that's going to be overlain this summer with asphalt overlays.
Yikes.
And we've got the backside of downtown, all the streets that are on the upper elevation of downtown.
High Street, Kaiser.
Kaiser, Perkins, all that stuff. That's all going to be overlaid this summer. The slurry seals in advance of the overlays are going on as we speak, literally as we speak. I think the crews are pulling off right now. And so any street almost every street that gets a slurry is going to get followed up with an overlay. So we've got the town is investing about $3 million in its roadway infrastructure with those overlay and slurry projects
Just this year
summer.
alone.
Yeah.
Dan, picture the commuter who just got off of Highway 80 and is frustrated with that commute and comes home, turns on Truckee Talks, maybe by accident, and hears you talking about all the road construction. We recognize that there are really 2 seasons up here, winter and road construction. But how do you coordinate those projects to have as little impact as possible when they're all concentrated in the same season?
It's a challenge. We try to have ongoing monthly dialogue with the local utility districts, private developers, et cetera. So we've got an idea of what projects are going to hit during what time periods. And we try to schedule traffic control we try to schedule the most impactful projects, stuff like downtown projects, West River Street, areas where traffic control is difficult. We attempt to schedule those projects outside of the peak summer season. We can't always do that.
Right.
Sometimes where we can't do that, we will schedule the project to we look very carefully at the traffic control and try to make sure that that's going to be as least impactful as possible. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on behind the scenes, and we never seem to get it perfect. There always seems to be one day where we got West River Street on construction and someone else has commercial row going, and my phone's ringing off the hook.
Right, right. There was one day a couple of years ago when we got bit, when you just couldn't get there from here in Truckee. But one day out of 900 is probably not a bad thing.
Well, except for that one day.
Yeah, right. That was not a good day for you,
Yeah.
I know that. In terms of convenience and non-convenience, I know this is something that we've talked about in our priority segment, but the public may not be hearing all of this. People ask why we don't do these major construction projects, or even what seem to us to be minor construction projects, at night. You want to talk about that a little bit? We
will generally look at every project, and if it's going to be severely impactful for traffic control, there is actually a decent amount of work that does occur at night. Our Public Works Department works all night long through the winter. As you know, that's not a construction issue. When we see the most challenging items, we will do them at night. What we see, I guess the drawbacks of night work are twofold. One is that you will sometimes pay higher prices for it.
Pretty significantly higher.
Yeah, and one of the biggest drawbacks is actually the safety issues, because you've got men and women that are out there working in the street around live traffic, and motorists can't see them as well. Right. And that's the aspect of the worker that's out in the street doing the project is never appreciated. I shouldn't say never. We've got folks that do appreciate that, but it's the type of work that's not a lot of folks aren't familiar with, and it makes it a little more difficult to relate to, I think. So what what we find is that the average motorist has a lot of frustration because they're like, why are these guys doing this? I'm getting delayed. The flip side of it is the safety of those workers that are out there doing that work is of paramount importance to the town as well. And that's some of the balancing act we go through on a really a project-by-project basis.
Yeah. I noticed some of the drilling that they've been doing, I guess for extraction on the gasoline spill on Donner Pass Road has been at night. And that's been a nice thing, I think, for everybody else. But that's been a whole nother project. We don't have to talk about that necessarily.
Part of it revolves around the neighborhood, too.
Right.
You know, residential neighborhood doesn't want you there at night.
Right, exactly.
Commercial neighborhood probably does.
Probably does.
And so.
I know we only have a few minutes left. Let's talk about some of the other projects that you have coming up.
Okay, the first one I'll bring up is actually not a project that the town is sponsoring, but it's a 267 bypass project. That's probably the biggest project in Truckee that, well, aside from the I80 jobs that are going on at the same time. But that's one of the biggest jobs that Truckee has seen in a long time, especially within the town limits. That's about a $34 million project. The engineers from Caltrans are expecting to have the project completed by late fall of this year. And we're hoping that it'll be open to traffic. At that time, the town will take over ownership of the existing 267 corridor, and we get the luxury of plowing and maintaining that road from here on out. So that's a big one. Some other ones that the town are currently sponsoring. One is a restoration project, feasibility study of the Trout Creek corridor that runs through downtown Truckee, trying to put together a specific plan of how that creek could be improved in the long range.
Yeah, and let's stop just for a minute and talk about that, because there are not a lot of people who appreciate that that's a natural creek that's sort of been built around in the downtown core.
It's interesting. The research we did showed us that in 1865 the creek came into downtown and went straight to the Truckee River, approximately down Bridge Street.
Interesting.
And then when the ice ponds were constructed back in the late 1800s or early 1900s, the concrete flume that you see near the church downtown was constructed to divert the water to the ice ponds. And so what we're looking at now is how can we revert that to a more natural state.
But we're not going to tear out Bridge Street and put the creek back down there.
I don't think so. Unless there's a lot more money out there than I know about. So that's a fun project because it allows us to be engineers, but we're working towards an environmental improvement. As engineers, we're constantly accused of trying to destroy the environment. It's not what we're doing, so that actually ends up being a win-win project for us.
That's great. Anything else coming in the hopper?
Probably the biggest one is the Truckee River Legacy Trail that the town has been assisting a lot of other agencies, other special districts own the land, Rotary groups trying to do a lot of the legwork on it, and it's been a great project because the special districts are saying, yeah, we're willing to work with the Rotary group or whoever owns this trail on the land, easements, etc. Rotary groups being a real spearhead. The town's trying to facilitate with our expertise on the engineering and environmental sides, so that's been a fun project to work on.
And speaking of trails, of course, the town just adopted the Master Trails Plan, and that's not saying that we're cutting trail right now. That's just saying that we've got some possible alignments. Have you been very involved in that, or?
I was involved with the kind of the conceptual development of the plan and looking at the standards that were being developed for it. I'm going to be mostly involved in is implementing. You know, the plan shows the kind of the gray print, they call it, not the blueprint, the gray print, and then it's our job to come up with the blueprint of the individual elements of it to help to implement that plan either through community-sponsored projects, private development-sponsored projects, trail foundations, and we find ourselves in an implementation and a coordination role on the trail plan implementation. And this Truckee River Legacy Trail, I think, is the first element of that.
That's been a great project for the Truckee Rotary, working on that and working, as you say, with a lot of different agencies to make that happen. Your job really as engineer and even public works director is making sure people get around. It isn't necessarily in their cars then. It's putting pathways and sidewalks and trails and roads and every other way for people to ambulate in our community.
Right. Build it and then break it with our maintenance activities and then maintain it, you know. The snow removal kind of trashes it, and then the summertime we spend fixing
Come
it
back
up,
and rebuild it.
fixing it up, and then we have to repave it every once in a while. So
Okay, so here's the question. We'll wrap this interview up with this question. Can people in Truckee ever anticipate a summer without road construction within the town limits?
at some point, I wouldn't bank on it in the next 5 years.
We're doing a lot of catching up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, you've been doing a great job for the town. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
And it's been fun. Say hello to Suzanne.
Yep.
All right. We'll be back in just a minute with upcoming events, so stay tuned.